Bob Woodward drew from hundreds of hours of interviews for his new book, Fear, Trump in the White House. He says Fear includes details from participants and witnesses to the Trump administration. The president is strongly criticizing the book.
This Woodward book is a total fraud. The book means nothing. It's a work of fiction. I'm very happy with the way it turned out because I think the book has been totally discredited.
In our interview with FBI Director Christopher Wray yesterday, we asked what he thinks of Woodward's claims of chaos and discord in the administration. You live in Washington, so you also know that much of this town is also talking about Bob Woodward's book called Fear. And in that book, he describes an administration, which you are part of, but he's specifically describing the White House as having a nervous breakdown of executive power. Have you experienced any of that?
I have not seen a nervous breakdown of executive power. I have also not read Mr. Woodward's book. And I'm not sure whether I'll ever find time.
Fear is published by Simon & Schuster, a division of CBS. Bob Woodward is with us now here in Studio 57. Good morning.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you about FBI Director Wray's comments about your book in just a second. But I know this book is with Simon & Schuster. It's a division of CBS, and you've had a number of your books featured on 60 Minutes. What do you make of what's happening here?
Yes, that's a great question. And CBS has gone through a scandal. Let's call it what it is.
Yes.
I know CBS very well. They own Simon & Schuster, my publisher, done 19 books, the Nixon storm, the Iraq war, the Afghan war, now the Trump storm. And they are well-led, independent, great leadership. Carolyn Reedy, John Karp, my editor, Alice Mayhew. I've worked with her for 47 years on all of those books. A tough, thoughtful editor. 60 Minutes did all of these books. I remember going back to Watergate, and there was a young reporter named Leslie Stahl working on the story. There is a great producer for 60 Minutes named Bob Anderson, who would come down and review the basis of the books I wrote about the Iraq war, about the Afghan war. Where'd this come from? Let's listen to the tapes. I trusted him.
Are you trying to say Bob will be okay at CBS? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because you've got strength. People go through tough times. I just, from intimate involvement with the books, with 60 Minutes, with Scott Pelley would come and interview me and do this kind of excavation of the experience I had. So you are going to be fine if you stick with your values. There is a great story in the New York Times by Jim Stewart about how the decision was made by the CBS board, and it shows exactly that there was a cover-up, there were lies, and then they finally faced the reality of what was going on with your former leader.
I actually agree with you, and I really appreciate you saying this. It's tough to see your company's name with the word in front of it, besieged. That's very difficult. But there are a lot of talented, hardworking people here. I say heads up and onward. But it is difficult. It is a scandal. We're going through it. But as you said, our values and our core is very, very strong. And we're eating into time talking about your book.
Okay, but you two women, what's your feeling about this? Not John, but you two, because this is about the treatment of women in a way that is truly outrageous, and I think the society is not going to stand for this anymore. And this is, I mean, and again, look at how this was exposed. The New Yorker magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and confidential sources, people who were willing to be trusted, and so there's a connection to all that's going on.
Agree.
Yeah, and just to answer your question, Gayle and I feel like we have spoken publicly about it perhaps far too many times. We talked about it 10 months ago, and
we're still talking about it.
We're still talking about it.
And you'll be talking about it.
That being said, we're journalists, and we hold other people accountable. and that it's the heart of journalism. That's what James Madison talked about. That's the First Amendment, about holding government officials and those public figures accountable, in his words. And so we are accountable as well in our own shop. And it also has to do with who writes history. People who are in charge who help write history, which is what your books are about, which is how history is told. You don't get history from just the public statements that are made at a podium. You get them by real reporting and asking people, and that's really the craft that you do. But let me ask you, because the public does in this era when the media is under fire for our integrity in many different sorts of ways, when someone like the FBI director, who is a man of incredible integrity, as you can tell, says that's not the executive that I encounter, one that's having a nervous breakdown. How do you reconcile those?
Well, his experience is limited with Trump. I spent over a year on this. I have literally hundreds of hours of tapes with people who were there. If you've looked at the book, they're very specific incidents.
Very detailed.
And it is a kind of, it opens the window. Look, going back to the Nixon case, any of these books, you're going to have what I call a survival denial by somebody who wants to be politically connected with the president, and that's fine. But as the great editor at the Washington Post, Ben Bradley, said, the truth emerges, and it does. And I've done this time and time again, where you get denials. Oh, Nixon and Kissinger did not pray on the eve of Nixon's resignation.
Well,
and
you are getting denials, Bob, and people.
Yes.
But you also have tapes. Would you ever release any of those tapes?
If somebody comes out and denies something specifically,
Well, Gary Cohen says it doesn't accurately portray my experience at the White House. Would you
that's
release
what's
the
called
tapes?
a non-denial denial. That, I mean,
Like he doesn't-
is he going to say that that document that's reproduced in the book?
Would you release tapes?
Well, if somebody really wants to challenge me, of course. But I've made agreements with people that these sources are going to remain confidential.
Bob, you've covered a lot of administrations. When you were doing the reporting for this, what didn't you hear? What are the things you're used to hearing from every administration that just was absent in this administration?
Well, it's not a team. Time and time again, the president is the one who is alone on how to deal with some of these national security issues. The whole cabinet meets with him in the Pentagon. There's a long description of it. And James Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, says the great gift of the greatest generation is this rules-based international order. And the Secretary of State says this has kept the peace for 70 years. Trump does not want to hear about it, and he gets mad and said all of this is BS. And at the end, you literally have the Secretary of Defense, because this was a meeting in the tank, which is the meeting place of the Joint Chiefs. They wanted to get Trump away from the TV and so forth. It is deflated, and this is when Secretary of State Tillerson, as has been reported, says the president is a effing moron.
Yeah, and you sort of end the book that way too. Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Thank
for
you,
joining
Bob.
us.
Good luck. You're going to be fine.
Thank you.
A lot of information in that book. It's called Fear, Trump in the White House. It's on sale wherever you like to buy your books.